That's a recording. That's on. Okay. You notice there's some overlap. I'll remind you, probably the most important things to note in this class is, yes, you can prove truth. There are four methods. We have the legal historical method. That's the first one. We have the logic and reasoning. Second one, we have the scientific method, and we have the harm matrix. We can look at them. If I were given this class in real depth, and someday I need to do that again, then we would go over every single proof concept in each area. But the best I can do with the kind of short time we're spending is to hit the main points. I'll remind you, we proved some real easy, great concepts in science, but the most important thing is your paradigm, your construct. We call them constructs or paradigm. Paradigm has become kind of it was a word de rigueur. Nobody knows what a paradigm is, but paradigm is the best thing. So instead of using the term paradigm, we use the term construct, because a construct is an area. And our constructs we've been looking at have been, you have the science construct, you have the construct of law, you have the construct of history, you have the construct of culture, you have a construct of basically the Bible. You know, we could, because we are Christians, and that's one of the reasons we include the Bible in our construct, we believe. We are convinced that the Bible is truth. And so therefore it's a good construct for us. But realize, okay, if we were, let's say, Islamic people, all of these rules are the same, or all these methods to prove truth are the same, but we might choose, if we were, let's say, Muslims, to use the construct of the Quran. Now, you're going to have a little problem with that, and the reason is, and I've showed you in other classes, right? I can very easily show you how the New Testament and the Old Testament, using the historical legal method, are truth, are history. I can't do that with the Quran. I can't do that with the Book of Mormon. I can't do that with the Bhagavad Gita. I can't do that. And I have not taught this class, I don't think, ever here, but I've taught it other places. I think I did it once, maybe, a comparison of all the religious documents and, you know, how you can prove them to be using the legal historical method. So, just to remind you, you can use these methods to prove no kidding truth. Otherwise, airplanes don't fly, just saying. And who knows what history is, right? In any case, we're up to a point where, and I'll remind you, I'm sorry about this, but the United States is, no kidding, a fascist economy. There is no such thing as a fascist government. I don't care what the current political nutsos think. There is no such thing as a fascist government. The only fascist governments that have ever existed, and you can check this historically, there has never been a right-wing fascist government. Never. Yes, ma'am.
You know, if you look up fascism on Google, it says that it is a right-wing concept.
Yes.
And that is so ridiculous. That's
why you shouldn't use Google nor Wikipedia. What you should use is the Britannica or real definitions. If you go and look up, you'll find, if you look in Wikipedia, I don't recommend Wikipedia. It's not a good source. And when I taught as a professor for, university, I would never allow anybody to use Wikipedia. I don't think Wikipedia existed when I was mainly teaching in that kind of sphere. But Wikipedia is not a good source. But if you look, you'll find Wikipedia cannot define fascism as a governmental system. You can define fascism as an economic system. Fascism is an economic system. It is not a governmental system. And as a matter of fact, remember, Nazis, I speak German fluently. I used to live in Germany. Nazi is an acronym for National Socialist. Nazis were National Socialists. They were also fascists. But remember, I told you, fascism is an economic system. Socialism is also an economic system. Quickly to remind you, in fascism, you control economies through regulation or through direct control of the boards. That's the way the Nazis did it. And by the way, that's the way the United States does it. Every time you hear about a new regulation, what does that do to you? A new regulation for, let's say, well, what's the one they're going to regulate really soon here? I think it's HVACs. HVACs, the government's going to make a blanket regulation for your air conditioning systems. What is that going to do effectively to you? It's going to raise the price of your air conditioning systems. Well, is that good? This goes to directly to our financial thing. And I'll also mention, I'm sorry, let me remind you, socialism is where the government owns the businesses, just like in Wichita, Kansas, the government owns the water system. Remember, I told you in a market system, you can never have anybody gone to the grocery store and not found the grocery store has what you can buy, you want to buy. Sometimes you can't get the beans you want, but you can always buy beans. Why is that? What controls the supermarkets? Supply and demand, a market system. If the government controlled the supermarkets, what would happen? Ever been to the Soviet Union? I was in East Germany back before the wall came down more than once. And I guarantee you, you don't want to live in that kind of system because I told you, the clerks move the stuff around as you buy it to make it look like they still have inventory because they don't have inventory because when the government is in control of food, you will starve. When the government is in control of anything. So guess what we have in Wichita, Kansas? Water. Rationing. Well, why is that? Why don't we have private water? If we had private water, the government wouldn't control it. We also have a monopoly, we have an allowed monopoly in electricity in Kansas, right? Why don't we have private electricity? Who controls the price of electricity? The board, a government board. Well, that doesn't sound very market. It's not. And you're going to have rationing. I guarantee you. The more green you go, the more rationing you're going to get. Because green does not, I'm a scientist. I can tell you, I swear to you. You know, before God and man, green will never give you what you want. If you want to have power, get nukes and fossil fuels. But whatever, I don't. Anyway, that's another topic. We may touch that next time. But on science, on the science ideas. Finally, communism is where the government owns everything. And remember, I told you, anybody pay taxes on your private property? So who owns your property? Because you're paying the government a rent to use your property. Well, who owns it? The government claims it. And by the way, don't pay your taxes and see what happens. So let's talk with those definitions, because remember, we know how to prove truth, and we've looked at truth in governmental systems and economic systems. Let's dig a little deeper. I talked about this a little bit last time, but let's talk about finances in general. For example, first definitions, and you may or may not have heard this, I mentioned it last week, but moral hazard. Moral hazard is a prospect that a party, I guess it's timed out. Come back live? Yes. Moral hazard is a prospect that a party insulated from risk may behave differently from the way they would behave if they were fully exposed to the risk. Moral hazard arises because an individual or institution does not bear the full consequences of his actions and therefore has a tendency to act less carefully than it otherwise would, leaving another party to bear some responsibility for the consequence of his actions. I know it's kind of complicated, but whatever. For example, an individual with insurance against automobile theft may be less vigilant about locking the car because of the negative consequences of automobile theft are partially borne by the insurance company. Or a company might not protect their own resources because they are not as concerned about protecting their business. For example, you know how many businesses were burned down in riots? Our laws that you can do your property, but yet the insurance companies ultimately pay for those losses. Yeah, we do. The insurance costs, you know, the government, but you know, those forget the fact that in corporate America, in you and me, because what do that have to do? Of course, you know, I would contend that is of your dollars, of your money. Always raise it raises prices of the value of the dollar decreases, and it's institutional. Here, right now, using 1%. So your dollar 2 cents every year. With no one thankfully all my they'll per year. That might be a very bad. Well, risk they would not know consider. Safety net more hazard. Any conversation that puts is responsible for the actions of others. Before we go too far, in the past, before what we call American compassion. It's called the compassion. Now, you went from a charity to a safety net. What's the difference? In a charity, how do we fund charity to help those in need? Private people, for example, not much churches, what is possible? The great that is it. But what do we do to show that in the world? We help those who need help. Part of our we believe is the hospitals, schools, churches. So in America, all the charity was done by most religious institutions, religious groups, and they took all the consequences. If you don't work, you don't eat. If your eye cut wood, if you're in so, and if you did so, it would feed you and whatever you needed. And guess what? The amount of in America, what you really go statistics. The poverty in America was almost zero, especially compared to the time. Today, we don't know what poverty is. You know, we have a serious problem because the amount of calories that Americans get, the average person impoverished has nicer shoes than I do with Nikes, has nicer clothes. And if you ever work with the urban, you know, you will find people that really need help, but usually they're not asking for it. Usually that's the point of churches, to find those people and help them. However, we are gone way on this side, and this is the point. In charity, who gives and what is it? Is voluntary, right? You don't come to church and I don't put a gun to your head and say, if you don't give me your tithe or your money to help these folks, I'm going to put you in jail or I'm going to harm you. However, government's compelled by force, literally a gun to your head, because what did they do? If you don't pay your taxes,
throw you in jail.
Well, they're not supposed to go put you in jail, but they can take all your property. That might be about the same. Remember the Harm Matrix? Theoretically, they're not supposed to be able to put you in jail. However, they did put, what's his name? That's how they used to put Al Capone in jail, right? Yes, sir.
Actually, in Germany, the government takes your taxes and gives it to the church. So you don't give an offering yourself, you have to pay it to the government. So if you don't pay the government, yeah.
That is correct. When I lived in Germany, you self-declare that you are Lutheran, Catholic, or atheist. If you're Lutheran or Catholic, they take 10% from your income, and that 10% goes directly to the church, the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church. If you say you're atheist, they don't take it. So guess what? What they have done?
There's a lot of atheists.
There's a lot of atheists in Germany. It's a great technique. Now, I want to point this out to you. You may never have heard this. The separation of church and state does not exist in the U.S. Constitution. Did you know that? It is in no constitutional document. It is in no founding document. It is found in Danbury. Danbury is a letter that was written, and many people don't understand this letter. I know I'm sidetracking, but I think this is an important idea because it's so, so founded in U.S. culture as an idea, but it's wrong. Danbury letter, there was a charity, there was an orphanage that wrote a letter to Jefferson. And the letter said, can you send funds from the U.S. government to support our orphanage in the United Kingdom? And Jefferson wrote back a letter, and he said, he did not use the term moral hazard, but he said, basically the purpose of the U.S. government is not to provide charity to anyone. No one is supposed to get any charity from the U.S. government. And he said, at the end of the letter, because of this is a natural separation between church and state. In other words, what was he saying in that letter? Yeah, it's not the government's role, but whose role is it to do charity? The church. The natural separation between church and government is not the non-interference of church in government, but rather that the government is not to encroach on the church and charity. And I told you an example. We had a person that came to our church when I was working in a nearish urban church and urban church, and a lady came and said, I'm hungry, can you feed me? I know you have a food bank. We said, great, we'll feed you. Can you clean up part of our kitchen? And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. I go down to the government and get my free welfare and my SNAP card, and they don't ask me to clean. But that is, you took away moral hazard, and you just destroyed the church's work. What is the church supposed to do if the government is taking care of all the charity. Oh, well, you should go look to see what a lot of churches are putting the money into. I pray that we're putting our money into great things that spread the gospel and also help other people. But if you notice, where is our charity really expanded to?
Outside our country.
Outside our country. And by the way, where is the charities for the Lutheran Church outside our country? Not as much Lutherans, but you'll see it a lot in the Catholic and the Anglican today, which are liturgical like us. Where are the African nations, for example, putting their emphasis? On America, to save us, because they see us as degenerate. Okay, that's just a sideline. The only way to prove that is through, papers and other information. But you know where I'm going with this. The whole point is governments compelled by force. Contrast that with businesses or with a charity or with churches. I use the term business here because we're talking about finances. Usually when we talk about finances, although it's really important for churches and finances, right? But we see churches are like charities. In other words, churches are charities. We don't expect to make a profit generally. Although some people have argued that with micro stuff, for the church to be able to make profits by aiding businesses in other countries or in our country, microloans and other influences with an expectation of profit helps improve all of society as opposed to giving it away. The reason I mention that is because remember the example I'm reading a book, That Printer of Udalls. If you've never read That Printer of Udalls, it's not the greatest read in the world, but it's the one that inspired Reagan to become president of the United States and also become a Christian. And in That Printer of Udalls, this is about the Midwest in the 1930s. And in that book, their whole point was to build they don't call it a poorhouse, but a place for destitute men to come who could have a place to stay that they would work. Basically getting wood and kindling, producing kindling that could be sold to homes and businesses. In other words, if you don't work, you don't eat. And what a great system of charity that was, because it was an independent means for the church to provide a means for people to provide for themselves through work. Yes, sir.
Boys Town is a great example. If you've ever been there and gone through, it was not just a charity. They worked, they taught them a trade. It's a really interesting story.
Well, we have the example of Cheltenham in Ohio, and there was that incredible ministry, but some liberal person was offended that the boys in that juvenile home, whatever, were forced to have a community garden, work and do things as to learn to be productive citizens. They thought that was child labor. And so they took away the work component of that in Ohio back in the 90s. And it was the saddest thing ever because Boys Town has such a great record. And there are people that fight that idea.
I just, as an aside, I see this as a fight between good and evil, where government is attempting to take over the business of the church. And if they take over the business of the church and there are no more needs, if people don't have any physical needs, they have emotional needs. Well, what does the government then try to take over? Your emotional needs, right? By the way, one of the biggest things they want to have today, whether you like the idea or not, medical marijuana. The reason medical marijuana is such a big deal is because, you ever heard of Soma? Anybody know what Soma is? In Brave New World, the Adolphus Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, projected that the government would use Soma, in other words, a mind-inducing drug, to drug the people so that they could then have peace and, make sure the people were not too boisterous, opposing the government, opposing stuff. So what is a modern soma? Modern soma is marijuana or other drugs, fentanyl, whatever. If you wonder why they allow it to come in and let it come in such large amounts, look no further than the idea that the government now becomes, right, if they take care of all the physical needs, and they take care of all the mental and emotional needs, you need a church. You need God.
Maybe we should stop paying our children money for doing chores at our homes. So that's just training them to expect payback. And they don't realize the value of food, clothing, shelter.
Well, it depends. If I don't disagree with you. There's a lot on that. That's an interesting side topic. But if the chores are tied, actual chores, as opposed to allowance, I think you meant that, right? Allowance?
Well, I think because they get their allowances, food and clothes and gas for you to take them places. I mean,
It might be good to put a price tag, right, beside every dinner meal. This is what it costs your mother, equivalent to make.
Well, they should realize that just out of their native intelligence.
Yes, sir.
The other thing that the government taking over a lot of these things that the church used to do is that it has taken away an opportunity for the church to minister to those people. I mean, that was an opening of a door when someone comes in for help to also introduce them to Christ. And that's gone away.
And now I'm going to step my foot. Remember, in my class, I don't like to touch the theological pool, but I'll throw this out in the theological pool. What does the adversary want?
Just that.
Just that. They want the people to not be dependent on God or the church, but rather to be dependent on government, the atheist government. Yes, sir.
There's a great quote from Scalia, who was a great man, by the way.
Yes.
The transformation of charity into legal entitlement has produced donors without love and recipients without gratitude.
Lionel, wasn't it the Clintons who said that they don't, they were slammed because they didn't tithe? There was on their tax records or something, there was no whatever, and they said, well, we pay taxes and our taxes are our tithe. Yeah, that's a quote from them, you can look that up. And they believe that paying the government their taxes is the equivalent of supporting charitable work through tithing to the church.
Yeah, and I would argue, because this is again touching the kind of theological pool a little bit, but I would argue that governments that are unchecked want to be that way. Their desire, and this is what we get to. Let's look at this a little bit, okay? It's reasonable for let's go back up here. We proved that the purpose of government was to protect private property, right? To protect the value of private property. What does it mean if the government takes from someone for whatever reason to give to another? Now, I would argue, and I gave you again the constitutional information, I would argue that it's illegal for the government to give money to anyone except for goods and services. In other words, if the government needs a new battleship, that's legitimate because I tax you because I need a new battleship, and therefore I pay you or someone to build my battleship and people to man it. That's totally reasonable. On the other hand, if I come to you and I compel you by force and say, if you don't pay your tax, I'm going to take your property, give me your money, and then I give it to someone else because of whatever reason, it doesn't matter why. If I give it to another person, that is an illegitimate use of your private property, and government should not be able to do that. It is reasonable for government to take private property in the form of taxes with the result of protecting private property. That's a small harm, to prevent a bigger harm. You'd have to admit a big harm is the Soviet Union, for example, or the Communist China, or whatever other nation, Iran, overrunning our borders or nuking us, right? That's a big harm. So a small harm is, yes, I'm willing to pay my taxes, and thank you, you're paying for my retirement, and you paid for me for all kinds of stuff. I love it. But I also worked for you 24/7 for 24 years, and I got a couple of medals to show for it, and a retirement, but that's okay. In any case, it is not reasonable for government to compel property by force with the purpose of giving the property to another if the purpose is not to protect private property for any reason, even to prevent a greater harm. Okay? This is provable. This is both reasonable and logically provable. You can't do a greater harm by the government overstepping what its purpose is, which is to protect private property. A purpose of government is not to take care of people. It has never been a purpose of government. In the Old Testament, New Testament, how many people are being cared for or taken care of by the government? You won't find it. That's touching on the new Old Testament, New Testament kind of thing. But a purpose of government is not to take care of people. This means that people are wards of the government. A government must always what? Serve the people, not the other way around. A ward of the government, for all intents and purposes, is a slave of the government. They become dependent on the government. If you haven't noticed this is kind of the way we're living right now. The government must be dependent on the people, not the other way around. So, let's see, do I have those? Yeah, here's another interesting point. There's some interesting points I want to talk about this a little bit. The government cannot be allowed to reduce the standard of living of anyone to improve the standard of living of someone else. So, for example, I come to you and say, I'm going to reduce your standard of living, which means I reduce your children's standard of living and all the standard of living of your whole family by taking money from you, but I'm going to increase your standard of living. Okay. Does that make sense? You know, it doesn't make sense to me. I want to mention this. I think I've got it. I think it was in an earlier section, but I didn't really talk much about it. We may get to it. I think it's a little bit lower. We talked about capitalism. We talked about the definition of capitalism. I want to talk about social welfare. We kind of talked about that, but there was a point I wanted to make. I guess we'll start with social welfare. Social welfare, and get to the point of how did we get there. I think how do we get there is really worthwhile. Social welfare provision refers to any program that seeks to provide a minimum level of income, service, or other support for disadvantaged people, such as the poor, the elderly, disabled, students, unpaid workers, such as mothers, other caregivers, underprivileged groups. Social welfare programs, this is not, I didn't write this, this is a definition specific for social welfare. Programs are undertaken by governments as well as NGOs. The great NGO is the church. Yes, I want you to see it. It's really interesting. Governments do not like NGOs unless they can control them. They do control our churches, unfortunately. Anyone heard of the Johnson Act? What the Johnson Act is? Johnson Act says that if a preacher preaches or a church teaches that you should not vote for a certain politician, they can take away your tax exempt status. So force the church to pay taxes. That's the Johnson Act. Do you think they use that to compel? As a matter of fact, they do. If you look, you'll find that a certain political group goes to churches all the time and preaches against certain other politicians and never is fined in the Johnson Act. If they caught our church, for example, or other conservative churches doing that, you would be shut out so quick. it would make your head spin, which is really interesting. And I'm of the opinion of a little civil disobedience. If every church in America said, forget this, this is unconstitutional, because what does the First Amendment say? Well, it says specifically, Congress shall make no law. What is the Johnson Act? A law that compels churches to not follow what they believe. In any case,
The interpretation has been so perverted though by churches, and they've gotten so scared of it.
oh yeah,
And at a minimum, they can operate within the words of the Johnson by not calling out someone by name, but pointing out what types of beliefs that each person has and relating those beliefs to the Bible. And if you make those points and they're truly Christians, they'll come to their own conclusion.
This has been a huge discussion in our church council.
Yeah,
And
waffle big time.
Well, we didn't want the big time, Fred, it should have been a discussion. It was important, and we have legal representation that did guide us. We have the American Defense Association that we have a legal retainer with as a church, and we have to be cautious. We don't want to lose our tax exempt status, but we want our parishioners to be informed voters. And so we came up with a way that hopefully it can educate people, but yes, we are not allowed to endorse specific candidates.
which is, by the way, against the First Amendment.
Pointed to information.
It's against the First Amendment and also against God's edicts to us in natural law. But I'm just pointing that out. The thing that's really interesting, and I want to point this out because this is really important. The Johnson Act does not prevent any church or church body or anyone in the church from going against petitions or laws, only against candidates, which might make you think a little bit, who wrote this law for whom? Candidates wrote it for themselves, right? That's pretty cool. I can write laws that are unconstitutional to protect me.
That's why we could fully support the Love Them Both Act, the whole constitutional amendment for the, state of Kansas, and, that's why they preached about that extensively.
That is exactly correct. However, let me point something out to you. What happens that I have a law called the Johnson Act that restricts political speech in churches? What do most churches, most parishioners, most people, non-Christians, non-parishioners, think that does to the church? It makes them think it's because laws have consequences. Just having a law like that to most average Americans means if the church gets involved with politics, they are not following the Johnson Act or the law, even if that's erroneous. And many pastors, you go and talk to them and say, some are well-informed, some are not so well. Pareto principle, 20% know, 60% guess, and 20% are clueless. That's true of everything, it seems like, in the world. So I guarantee you that even among pastors or churches, many don't understand the Johnson Act. Yeah, you pull it out every day and read it, right? I'm just saying, the problem with laws against freedom of speech like that, freedom of religion, have great impacts in society, because then you get people even talking about separation of church and state, which is not in the Constitution, is not in a constitutional document, is not validated anywhere except in Danbury, which is a letter. Yes, sir.
Well, if nothing else, it creates a chilling effect that has unintended consequences, and kind of the worst, it fuels the need for, or the perception of the need for censorship.
Bingo. I agree with that 100%. This is a problem with laws, and who was it? One of the Supreme Court justices just wrote a book about we have too many laws. I told you, it's not the laws that are really the problem, although they are a problem. It's the regulations that are really the problem. The laws may never touch you. The regulations are choking you every day. And you may not realize it. You may not realize how the regulations that are made, oh, they protect people, they protect you, they protect me. I showed you, we proved how they don't protect anyone, but they exist because who wants to control? The government wants control. Bingo. Here are examples of social welfare programs. Compulsory superannuation savings programs. What is that? Social Security. Social Security. If the government let you keep 15% of your income, you'd be a millionaire. But instead, they take your money. Compulsory social insurance programs, often based on income to pay for social welfare service being provided. Obamacare is an example. The corporate taxation system may be inseparable from the income tax. Pensions or other financial aid, including Social Security, that's the same as the savings program, tax relief, et cetera, et cetera. Low-cost nursing, medical hospital care for those who are sick, injured, or don't want to care for themselves. When you hear this, you say, oh, of course we want to help people. How did we help people before the government was so involved?
Helping them help themselves.
Well, we had, churches had hospitals. Remember, when I'm a historian kind of dude, okay? I do history, I do science, but I've told you the early churches started in the Asclepions. We know that the early church was meeting in the Asclepions. Asclepions were where people went to die in the Greek world or be hopefully healed. And the Christians were taking care of these people in the Asclepions, which became hospitals. Christianity invented the first hospitals because in the ancient world, the reason you were sick is you were cursed by the gods. And Christians said, you're not cursed by the gods. You're sick. We're going to help you. And even if you are cursed by the gods, because the God can help you, right? So churches started with schools and hospitals. Where's a hospital? We have a school. It's so good. We don't have a hospital. Why? Regulations would make it way too expensive for us to have one. And plus, the United States charity hospital has been destroyed since ephemeral in 1974, which was passed. If you didn't know, charity hospitals are dying.
Catholic Church had
A zillion of them. They have been destroyed by regulation and law in the United States. So, we want to help people. How do we do that? Through the church, through charity. Low-cost public education. Well, okay. You notice what it says. Okay, obviously I didn't write this. This is written by, because there is no such thing as free or low-cost public education. How much are we paying for a kid to go to school in Wichita, Kansas? Anybody have an idea?
about 15 a year.
$24,000 a year. $24,000. You could send every kid to collegiate and save money. You could send the average parochial school is spending less than $5,000 per kid per year. You send them all to parochial. So who's paying for it, by the way? You are. You are all paying for it. Whether you have children or not, whether you have children in school or not, you're paying for it. And you're getting a great deal, right? Those kids are prepared. Now they all have straight A's. They all have straight A's, but where's their education? They can't read, they can't write, they can't figure. They're going to be great building airplanes in the future. Just saying.
Literacy rates, I think, 51%.
You can lead all this. This is just all the welfare programs. This is from a list provided that I got, a list from the government. The purpose of the government is to protect the value of private property. The government should not compel property where something will not result in protecting the value of the private property. It's not logically defined purpose of government. The government should not be reducing standard of living of one person to increase the standard of living of another person. Legitimate government should not provide for anyone's social welfare. Who provides for social welfare? Here is what I wanted to get to today. I think this is the best thing to leave you with. We'll move into science and other stuff next week. But historically, this is really important for us to understand historically. Government uses largesse to control what is largesse? Free stuff.
Circuses and bread.
Bread and circuses if you like, but put it into modern, it is social welfare programs. Social welfare programs where you don't work, but I give you a pile of butts or phones or whatever I give you, right? I give you. So government uses largesse to control populations. The Romans were the first ones to do this. As far as we know historically, the Romans used bread and circuses. We don't think they're the first. They're definitely not the last. But the government, the Romans really had no other tools. Anyone read The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire by what's his name? Huh? No, that husband and wife team that wrote. Anyway, probably it's on the back burner today because it's too truthful. But The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, they also wrote a lot about civilizations, about Greek. I used them a lot as primary sources. They're considered one of the greatest primary sources of historical information. But in The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, their big deal was the Romans had destroyed their work ethic and their system through bread and circuses. The reason they did bread and circuses is because they were a very wealthy nation with lots of money coming in. Remember, should we pay tribute to Caesar? Tribute to Caesar was the money they were using for their social welfare. To keep the people quiet and happy, they paid them off. But what they did is they destroyed the fabric of their society by destroying the basis of the family in the Roman Empire. In a republic like our government or a democratic system like Athens. By the way, we do not have a democratic government. Democrat democracy do not appear in any constitutional document. I challenge you. I challenge you to find the word democratic democracy in any form. It is not found in any founding document. You can't find it in the Federalist Papers, and they say, what do they say about it? We don't want it. Why? Because they studied both early republics and democracies and found they failed. So the republic or a democratic system like Athens, here's the problem. The ability of the people to vote themselves largesse becomes a significant problem. Part of the reason we have a constitutional republic is to prevent that. I told you, if you look at the stuff, if you look at the information here, I always love to say the Constitution allows Congress to spend money on post office, post roads, DC, Army, and Navy. They have no other authority to spend money, according to the Constitution. Where is all the money in all the pots? Post office, post roads, Army, Navy, and DC. The SNAP programs come out of a specific budgeting process that is not, there's not a SNAP budget. There's not a budget for welfare, social welfare. It goes to the agricultural department, which is considered a general cost in DC to support the Department of Agriculture. Was there a Department of Agriculture when the founding fathers founded our nation? There was no Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Department of Education. It was the War Department, not the Department of Defense, so we changed the name to protect the innocent. Orwell was talking about. Anyway, I would argue that I've read the Constitution. I can lend you a copy and even give you a pocket one. You have a problem with the idea that in America you're supposed to be able to vote yourself largesse, but that's what happened. I told you about Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor under Germany's Emperor William I. He invented Social Security. The purpose of Social Security was to control the German people. He wrote this by giving largesse to the elderly, it made it less likely they would revolt. By promising largesse to the young, it made them less likely to revolt. Since the government was taxing your own money to give back to you at a much lower return than available for the free market. I would argue this is direct theft. In 1898 or 1889, Social Security was passed by the German Parliament. In 1935, we got our own people control system, the SSA, Social Security Administration. You can find this information on the SSA government website. They won't mention the point of control. They used to have a picture of von Bismarck because he was the inventor of Social Security, but they don't show his picture anymore. Maybe they got smart. And by the way, have you ever read the writings of FDR? Why did FDR create Social Security? To help the people, right? No, in his own writings, he lauded Otto von Bismarck and said, this is a wonderful way to prevent the people from revolting. What was he worried about? Well, he wanted to be reelected. That was part of his issue. But all the programs he introduced, basically, if you read much, I've got books and books and books about it. Every program he did meant the Great Depression lasted in America from 1929 until 1947. Every other nation was out of the Great Depression in 5 years, except America. That should be a real indicator of how effective his programs were. The problem with his programs were he wanted to do what? Control the people. As a sideline, and you can find this, go look it up. You can find this, remember Daddy Warbucks? Daddy Warbucks was a stand-in for the Rockefellers and from others. When America was having great problems, the Rockefellers and all the wealthy people, the people that would be billionaires today, came to talk to FDR and said, we want to help you. We want to help produce jobs. We want to help get the economy going. What did FDR say? Talk to the hand. The ears ain't listening. He did not want that. What did he want?
Credit to government.
Well, not just credit. He wanted to invoke, remember fascist systems? Who was his greatest hero? Who was FDR's greatest hero in his books, in his writings? Mussolini and Hitler. Because he saw that Hitler got the trains running and Mussolini got the trains running and they balanced their budgets. And how'd they do it? Well, that's part of it, but basically socialism and fascism. By basically doing Otto von Bismarck's program, right? Great program. Anyway, generally, culturally, and this is kind of the proof text here, generally in the 20th century, governments only use largesse control. Until the 20th century, governments only use largesse. What's largesse? Giving away, not through laws, but giving away through other things. In the 20th century, governments began to claim social welfare reasons for their control, the result of socialism. The problem is that one of the planks of kindness is exactly that. Number 8, remember that we went through the planks of the Communist Manifesto? Number 8 is equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. How do you achieve equal liability of labor? You can control all labor. Labor is controlled through currency and property. One of the reasons, why do they hate Elon Musk so much? Well, you can't control him because what has he got? He has got money and he's got companies, right? And by the way, Boeing couldn't get the rockets with the government NASA money up, but Elon Musk did it privately?
And he's going to bring their people back.
He did, he already did. He brought them back. Oh my goodness gracious, you mean the government can't do the great, space program better than a private individual? Look, you gotta reflect on your brains that, the government can't. Remember what Reagan said? Reagan said, what's the biggest problem with government? Government. Yeah, government will get in its own way.
And the government actually got in Boeing's way because they forced them to use technology and things that were already in place that failed in the past. Musk wasn't under those same conditions. Wasn't an equal playing field. It's regulation.
I agree 100%. In fact, even to go further, what is the big fight that Elon Musk is having right now with SpaceX? Anybody know?
Well, they're trying to shut him down for other reasons, environmental reasons. Yeah.
But who's doing it?
California.
Well, California is, but who is the real pusher of that? Yeah, through what? What agency?
Yes.
The FAA. Our beloved brothers in the FAA. Those guys, we're not happy until you're not happy. I'll put that at tape. You're not happy until we're not happy until you're not happy. You know, the FAA, I can tell you, there have been other people that wanted to do space type programs before Elon Musk. You know what the FAA did? They made rules that prevented you from shutting off rockets without their permission, environmental stuff, without the state getting involved, without this, without that, with the other thing. And guess what? Those companies went bankrupt. They're done. They didn't fight it. They couldn't fight it. So they said, we're dead. That's good. So, yes, sir.
Ronald Reagan also said the scariest words are, we're from the government, we're here to help.
And we're to help, yeah. I'll give you a thing about that. I used to work in the government. I worked for the government for 24 years, deep in acquisition, okay? And the very idea, I used to beat people on the head all the time because they had the idea that if a company, let's say Lockheed Martin or a company failed, they were going to come in like people charging on a white horse and they were going to save the program. So since when are untrained, inarticulate, young, inexperienced government workers going to save anything? It never has happened in the history of the world. They're still waiting for that Babylonian guy to come save the great gardens of Babylon from collapse. And it collapsed, a few thousand years ago. So just say it. The government has never been able to solve it. For our purpose in the advent of government and social welfare was the purpose of socializing society and therefore achieving control of society. So, we could go through all the details of each argument. We already went through a cultural argument kind of based in historical proof, because anybody here thinks that Roman largesse or the largesse of the King of England is a good thing? Nobody's raising their hands? You don't think that the rich people who are in charge, giving out, throwing some money to you is a good thing? At least the currency has value. Our currency, they can throw dollar bills, it has no value at all. It's just dollar bills kind of ish. Yeah. If you have come to the conclusion that largesse by Romans and by the monarchy is positive, then I'll allow you to also conclude that social welfare by the government is a positive thing. However, what happens, and this is the final thing, what happens every year to the poverty rate? The more money they give,
Poverty goes up.
the higher the poverty gets. Because you've taken moral hazard away from the people who really needed some moral hazard. People who don't want to work, like homeless maybe, need to do what? Work. Have you ever read the Bible? Good old Solomon says over and over and over again, how do you find joy in the world? Through a man's work. Through work. That's how you gain joy. Oh, well, I guess we'll social welfare them into control, but they won't work. It's all right. And you won't eat eventually because all your money is gone. They'll still take it. It's okay. I wouldn't tell you how much I paid taxes last year. It's ugly. Anyway, thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us through this week. In your name we pray. Amen. I think next week is our last